The tin whistle, also called the penny whistle, English flageolet, Scottish penny whistle, tin flageolet, Irish whistle, feadóg cubed stáin and Clarke London Flageolet is a simple, six-holed woodwind instrument. It is a fipple flute, putting it in the same category as the recorder, Native American flute, and other woodwind instruments that meet such criteria. A tin whistle player is called a tin whistler or simply a whistler. The tin whistle is closely associated with Celtic music. History of the whistle. The tin whistle in its modern form is from a wider family of fipple flutes which have been seen in many forms and cultures throughout the world. In Europe such instruments have a long and distinguished history and take various forms. Most widely known of these are the recorder, tin whistle, flageolet, txistu and tabor pipe. Almost all primitive cultures had a type of fipple flute and is most likely the first pitched flute-type instrument in existence. A possible Neanderthal fipple flute from Slovenia dates from 81,000–53,000 BC, a German flute from 35,000 years ago, and flute made from sheep's bone in West Yorkshire dating to the Iron Age. Written sources that describe a fipple-type flute include the Roman and Greek aloes and tibia. In the early Middle Ages peoples of Northern Europe were playing the instrument as seen in 3rd century British bone flutes, and Irish Brehon law describes flute-like instrument. By the 12th century Italian flutes came in a variety of sizes, and fragments of 12th century Norman bone whistles have been found in Ireland, and an intact 14 cm Tusculum clay whistle from the 14th century in Scotland. In the 17th century whistles were called flageolets. A term to describe a whistle with a French-made fipple headpiece, and such instruments are linked to the development of the English flageolet, French flageolet and recorders of the Renaissance and Baroque period. The term flageolet is still preferred by some modern tin whistle who feel this better describes the instrument, as this characterizes a wide variety of fipple flutes, including penny whistles. Modern tin whistle The modern penny whistle is indigenous to the British Isles, particularly England, when factory-made tin whistles were produced by Robert Clarke from 1840–1882 in Manchester and later New Moston, England. Down to 1900, they were also marketed as Clarke London Flageolets, or Clarke Flageolets. The whistle's fingering system is similar to that of the six-hole, simple system English flutes. The six-hole, diatonic system is also used on Baroque flutes, and was of course well known before Robert Clarke began producing his tin whistles. Clarke's first whistle, the Meg, was pitched in high A and was later made in other keys suitable for Victorian parlour music. The company showed the whistles in the Great Exhibition of 1851. The Clarke tin whistle is voiced somewhat on an organ pipe with a flattened tube forming the lip of the fipple mouthpiece and is usually made from rolled tin sheet or brass. Manufactured tin whistles became available no earlier than 1840, and were mass-produced and widespread due to their relative affordability. As the penny whistle was generally considered a toy, it has been suggested that children or street musicians were paid a penny by those who heard them playing the whistle. However, in reality the instrument was so called because it could be purchased for a penny. The name tin whistle was also coined as early as 1825. But neither the tin whistle nor the penny whistle name seems to have been common until the 20th century. The instrument became popular in several musical traditions, namely, English, Scottish, Irish and American traditional music. Due to its affordability, the tin whistle was a popular household instrument, as ubiquitous as the harmonica. In the second half of the 19th century, some flute manufacturers such as Barnett Samuel and Joseph Wallace also sold whistles. These had a cylindrical brass tube. Like many old whistles, they had lead fipple plugs, and since lead is poisonous, caution should be exercised before playing an old whistle. The generation whistle was introduced in the first half of the 20th century, and also featured a brass tube with a lead fipple plug. The design was updated somewhat over the years, most notably the substitution of a plastic fipple for the lead plug design. While whistles have most often been produced in higher pitches, the low whistle is not unknown historically. The Museum of Fine Arts, Boston has in its collection an example of a 19th-century low whistle from the famous Scalping collection. During the 1960s revival of traditional Irish music, the low whistle was recreated by Bernard Overton at the request of Finbar Furey. Contemporary whistles. The most common whistles today are made of brass tubing, or nickel-plated brass tubing, with a plastic fipple. Generation, feadóg cubed G, oak, acorn, sujlums, and other brands fall in this category. The next most common form is the conical sheet metal whistle with a wooden stop in the wide end of form, the fipple, the Clarke's brand being the most prevalent. Other less common variants are the all-metal whistle, the PVC whistle, the flaneur square-holed whistle, and the wooden whistle. Gaining popularity as a folk instrument in the early 19th century and the Celtic music revivals, penny whistles now play an integral part of several folk traditions. Whistles are a prevalent starting instrument in English traditional music, Scottish traditional music and Irish traditional music, since they are often cheap, relatively easy to start with, and the fingerings are nearly identical to those on the traditional six-hole flute. The tin whistle is a good starting instrument to learn the Willian pipes, which has similar finger technique, range of notes and repertoire. The tin whistle is the most popular instrument in Irish traditional music today. In recent years, a number of instrument builders have started lines of high-end, handmade whistles, which can cost hundreds of dollars US each, €1 expensive in comparison to cheap whistles, but nevertheless cheaper than most other instruments. These companies are typically either a single individual or a very small group of craftsmen who work closely together. The instruments are distinguished from the inexpensive whistles in that each whistle is individually manufactured and voiced by a skilled person rather than made in a factory. Tuning. Whistle keys. The whistle is tuned diatonically, which allows it to be used to easily play music in two major keys, a perfect fourth apart and the minor key a major second above the lowest note. The whistle is identified by its lowest note, which is the tonic of the lower of two major keys whose tonics are a perfect fourth apart, that the whistle most easily plays in. Note that this method of determining the key of the instrument is different from the method used to determine the key of a chromatic instrument, which is based on the relationship between notes on a score and sounded pitch. Whistles are available in a wide variety of different keys. The most common whistles can easily play notes in the keys of D and G major. Since the D major key is lower, these whistles are identified as D whistles. The next most common whistle tuning is a C whistle, which can easily play notes in the keys of C and F major. The D whistle is the most common choice for Irish and Scottish music. Although the whistle is essentially a diatonic instrument, it is possible to get notes outside the principal major key of the whistle either by half-holing or by cross-fingering. However, half-holing is somewhat more difficult to do correctly, and whistles are available in many keys, so for other keys a whistler will typically use a different whistle instead, reserving half-holing for accidentals. Some whistle designs allow a single fipple, or mouthpiece, to be used on differently keyed bodies. Low whistles. There are larger whistles, which by virtue of being longer and wider produce tones an octave lower. Whistles in this category are likely to be made of metal or plastic tubing, sometimes with a tuning slide head, and are almost always referred to as low whistles but sometimes called concert whistles. The low whistle operates on identical principles to the standard whistles, but musicians in the tradition may consider it a separate instrument. The term soprano whistle is sometimes used for the higher-pitched whistles when it is necessary to distinguish them from low whistles. Playing technique. Fingering and range. The notes are selected by opening or closing holes with the fingers. With all the holes closed, the whistle generates its lowest note, the tonic of a major scale. Successively opening holes from the bottom upward produces the rest of the notes of the scale in sequence. With the lowest hole open it generates the second, with the lowest two holes open, it produces the third, and so on. With all 6 holes open, it produces the 7th. As with a number of woodwind instruments, the tin whistle second and higher registers are achieved by increasing the air velocity into the ducted flue windway. On a transverse flute this is generally done by narrowing the lip embouchure. Since the size and direction of the tin whistle's windway is fixed, like that of the recorder or fipple flute, it is necessary to increase the velocity of the airstream, Fingering in the second register is generally the same as in the first fundamental, though alternate fingerings are sometimes employed in the higher end of the registers to correct a flattening effect caused by higher air column velocity. Also, the tonic note of the second register is usually played with the top hole of the whistle partially uncovered instead of covering all holes as with the tonic note of the first register. This makes it harder to accidentally drop into the first register and helps to correct pitch. Recorders perform this by pinching open the dorsal thumb hole. Various other notes can be accessed by cross-fingering techniques, and all the notes can be flattened by half-holing. Perhaps the most effective and most used cross-fingering is that which produces a flattened form of the seventh note. This makes available another major scale. The standard range of the whistle is 2 octaves. For a D whistle, this includes notes from D5 to D7. That is, from the second D above middle C to the fourth D above middle C. It is possible to make sounds above this range, by blowing with sufficient force, but, in most musical contexts, the result will be loud and out of tune due to a cylindrical bore. Ornamentation traditional whistle playing uses a number of ornaments to embellish the music, including cuts, strikes and rolls. Most playing is legato with ornaments to create breaks between notes, rather than tongued. The traditional music concept of the word ornamentation differs somewhat from that of European classical music in that ornaments are more commonly changes in how a note is articulated rather than the addition of separately perceived notes to the piece. Common ornaments and articulations include, cuts. Cuts are very briefly lifting a finger above the note being sounded without interrupting airflow into the whistle. For example, a player playing a low D on a D whistle can cut the note by very briefly lifting the first finger of his or her lower hand. This causes the pitch to briefly shift upward. The cut can be performed either at the very start of the note or after the note has begun to sound. Some people call the latter a double cut, or a mid-note cut. Strikes or taps are similar to cuts except that a finger below the sounded note is briefly lowered to the whistle. For example, if a player is playing a low E on a D whistle, the player could tap by quickly lowering and raising his or her bottom finger. Both cuts and taps are essentially instantaneous. The listener should not perceive them as separate notes. Rolls. A roll is a note with first a cut and then a strike. Alternatively, a roll can be considered as a group of notes of identical pitch and duration with different articulations. There are 2 common types of rolls. The long roll is a group of 3 slurred notes of equal pitch and duration, the first sounded without a cut or strike, the second sounded with a cut, and the third sounded with a strike. The short roll is a group of 2 slurred notes of equal pitch and duration, the first sounded with a cut and the second sounded with a strike. Kranz are ornaments borrowed from the Willian piping tradition. They are similar to rolls except that only cuts are used, not taps or strikes. On the tin whistle they are generally only used for notes where a roll is impossible, such as the lowest note of the instrument. Slides are similar to portamentos in classical music. A note below or above the intended note is fingered, and then the fingering is gradually shifted in order to smoothly raise or lower the pitch to the intended note. The slide is generally a longer duration ornament than, for example, the cut or the tap, and the listener should perceive the pitch changing. Tonguing is used sparingly as a means of emphasizing certain notes, such as the first note in a tune. Tin whistle players usually do not tongue most notes. To tongue a note, a player briefly touches their tongue to the front of the roof of the mouth at the start of the note, creating a percussive attack. Vibrato can be achieved on most notes by opening and closing one of the open holes, or by variation of breath pressure, and tremolo. Of the 2, fingered vibrato is much more common than diaphragmatic vibrato, except on notes like the lowest note on the whistle where fingered vibrato is much more difficult. A common method of achieving vibrato is to finger a note, and then quickly flick a finger on and off, not the hole below the fingered note, but the hole 2 below the fingered note, leaving an open hole in between. This technique can be heard on the Chieftain's iconic air, Women of Ireland. Some tricks. Leading tones are the 7th just before the tonic, so named because melodic styling often uses the seventh to lead into the tonic at the end of a phrase. On most tin whistles, the leading tone to the lowest tonic can be played by using the little finger of the lower hand to partially cover the very end opening of the whistle, while keeping all other holes covered as usual for the tonic. Tone. The tone of the tin whistle is largely determined by its manufacturing. Clarke-style rolled metal whistles tend to have an airy and pure sound, while generation-style cylindrical instruments tend to have clear or pure whistle sounds. Inexpensive rolled metal whistles, such as those from Cooperman fife and drum, may be very airy in sound, and may be difficult to play in the upper register. Often placing a piece of tape over one edge of the fipple slot to narrow the fipple will improve the instrument's tone and playability significantly. Scales. While, as mentioned under fingering, a player will usually play a given instrument only in its tonic key and possibly in the key beginning on the fourth, nearly any key is possible, becoming progressively more difficult to keep in tune as the player moves away from the whistle's tonic, according to the circle of fifths. Thus a D whistle is fairly apt for playing both G and A, and a C instrument can be used fairly easily for F and G. Repertoire. A number of music genres commonly feature the tin whistle. Irish and Scottish music. Traditional music from Ireland and Scotland is by far the most common music to play on the tin whistle, and comprises the vast majority of published scores suitable for whistle players. While the tin whistle is very common in Irish music to the point that it could be called characteristic of the genre and fairly common in Scottish music, it is not required in either genre. Kwela. Kwela is a genre of music created in South Africa in the 1950s, and is characterized by an upbeat, jazzy tin whistle lead. Kwela is the only music genre created around the sound of the tin whistle. The low cost of the tin whistle, or jive flute, made it an attractive instrument in the impoverished, apartheid-era townships. The Honna tin whistle was especially popular in Kwela performance. The Kwela craze accounted for the sale of more than 1 million tin whistles. In the late 1950s, Mbaqanga music largely superseded Kwela in South Africa, and so it followed that the saxophone surpassed the tin whistle as the township people's wind instrument of choice. Kwela master Aaron Big Voice Jack Lerrell continued to perform into the 1990s. A few bands, such as the Positively Test Card of London, continued to record Kwela music. Kwela sheet music is rarely published, and many of the recordings of founding Kwela artists are out of print. One representative compilation is South African Jazz and Jive. Notation. Tin whistle music collections are generally notated in one of three different formats. Standard musical notation. It is common to score music for the whistle using standard musical notation. The tin whistle is not a transposing instrument. For example, music for the D tin whistle is written in concert pitch, not transposed down a tone as would be normal for transposing instruments. Nevertheless, there is no real consensus on how tin whistle music should be written, or on how reading music onto the whistle should be taught. However, when music is scored for a soprano whistle, it will be written an octave lower than it sounds, to spare ledger lines and make it much easier to read. The traditional music of Ireland and Scotland constitutes the majority of published scores for the whistle. Since the majority of that music is written in D major, G major, or one of the corresponding musical modes, use of the D major or G major key signatures is a de facto standard. For example, the C whistle edition of Bullock's popular The Clarke Tin Whistle Handbook is scored in D and differs from the D edition only in that the accompanying audio CD is played on a C whistle. Reading directly onto the C whistle is popular for the obvious reason that its home key or name key is the all-natural major key. Some musicians are encouraged to learn to read directly onto one whistle, while others are taught to read directly onto another. The whistle player who wants music to read onto all whistles will need to learn the mechanics of written transposition, taking music with one key signature and rewriting it with another. Tablature notation for the tin whistle is a graphical representation of which tone holes the player should cover. The most common format is a vertical column of 6 circles, with holes to be covered for a given note shown filled with black, and a plus sign at the top for notes in the second octave. Tablature is most commonly found in tutorial books for beginners. equals tonic solfa equals. The tonic solfa is found in Ireland and possibly Wales, especially in schools. Many schools have printed sheets with tunes notated in tonic solfa, although in Ireland more have teaching by rote. With the availability of good standard notation tutor books, teaching is possibly moving in this direction. ABC notation equals. Since the majority of popular tin whistle music is traditional and out of copyright, it is common to share tune collections on the Internet. ABC notation is the most common means of electronic exchange of tunes. It is also designed to be easy to read by people, and many musicians learn to read it directly instead of using a computer program to transform it into a standard musical notation score. Well-known performers in Irish traditional music. During the 1960s, Tommy Makem played the tin whistle as a member of the Clancy Brothers and Tommy Makem, one of the most influential Irish folk groups, especially popular during the American folk music revival. In 1973, Paddy Maloney and Sean Potts released the album Tin Whistles, which helped to popularize the tin whistle in particular, and Irish music in general. Mary Bergin's Feadóg Gar Stáin and Feadóg Gar Stáin too were similarly influential. Other notable players include Carmel Gunning, Micho Russell, Joni Madden, Brian Finnegan, and C.N. Ryan. Many traditional pipers and flute players also play the whistle to a high standard. Festy Conan, often considered the best slow-air player. In Scottish traditional music, award-winning singer and musician Julie Fowley recorded several tracks on the tin whistle, both in her solo work and with the band Da Squared Jazz. In Quilla, Aaron Big Voice Jack Lerrell and his band recorded a single called Tom Hark, which sold 5 million copies worldwide, and which Associated Television used as the theme song for the 1958 television series The Killing Stones. But the most famous star of the Quilla era was Spokes Mashian. Paul Simon's 1986 album Grassland draws heavily on South African music, and includes penny whistle solos in the traditional style, played by Maurice Goldberg. In popular music, as a traditional Irish musical instrument, the Irish rock bands The Cranberries and the Pogues incorporate the tin whistle in some of their songs, as do such American Celtic punk bands as the Tossers, Dropkick Murphys, and Flogging Molly. Andrea Corr of Irish folk rock band The Corrs also plays the tin whistle. Saxophonist Leroy Moore, founding member of the American jam band Dave Matthews Band, plays the tin whistle in a few of the band's songs. Bob Hallett of the Canadian folk rock group Great Big Sea is also a renowned performer of the tin whistle, playing it in arrangements of both traditional and original material. Icelandic post-rock band Sigur Rós Cubed S concludes their song Hufsa Cubed L with a tin whistle solo. Barry Privet of the American Celtic rock band Carbon Leaf performed several songs using the tin whistle. Lemcop uses the tin whistle in the song The Scary Caroler. The Unicorns use the tin whistle in the song Sea Ghost. In jazz, Steve Buckley, a British jazz musician, is renowned for using the penny whistle as a serious instrument. His whistle playing can be heard on recordings with Loose Tubes, Django Bates and his album with Chris Batchelor Life as We Know It. Les Lieber is a celebrated American jazz tin whistle player. Lieber has played with Paul Whiteman's band and also with the Benny Goodman Sextet. Lieber made a record with Django Reinhardt in the AFN studios in Paris in the post-Second World War era and started an event called Jazz at Noon every Friday in a New York restaurant, playing with a nucleus of advertising men, doctors, lawyers, and business executives who had been or could have been jazz musicians. Howard Johnson has also been known to play this instrument. Musical polymath Howard Levy introduces the tune True North with a jazz and very traditionally Celtic-inspired whistle piece on Bela Fleck and the Flecktones' UFO Tofu. In film music, Howard Shore called for a tin whistle in D for a passage in his Concerning Hobbits from the Lord of the Rings film trilogy. The tin whistle symbolizes the Shire, together with other instruments such as the guitar, the double bass, and the bodhrán. The tin whistle also plays a passage in the main theme in the same trilogy. The tin whistle is heard in the song My Heart Will Go On by Celine Dion in the movie Titanic. The tin whistle also features prominently in the soundtrack of the film How to Train Your Dragon, and is connected to the main character, Hiccup. The Tin Whistle is featured in the winning song of the 2013 Eurovision Song Contest Only Teardrops by Emile de Forest. See also, Fife, List of tin whistle players. References. Footnotes General Dannett, Norman. The Penny Whistle. The Clarke Tin Whistle Company. Dannett, Norman. The History of the Tin Whistle. The Clarke Tin Whistle Company. ISBN 0-9549693-2-4, Gatherer, Nigel. History. The Scottish Whistle. Retrieved January 30, 2006. Gross, Richard. Tin Whistle Fingering Chart. Tin Whistle Fingering Research Centre. Retrieved January 16, 2006. Hannigan, Steve N. Leadsom, David. Whistory, A Low Whistle History. The Low Whistle Book. Cinepermel Publications. ISBN 0-9525305-1-1. Larson, Gray. A Guide to Gray Larson's Notation System for Irish Ornamentation. Retrieved January 24, 2006. McCulloch, L.E. Historical Notes on the Tin Whistle. The Complete Irish Tin Whistle Tutor. Oak Publications. ISBN 0-8256-0340-4. Ox, Bill. The Clarke Tin Whistle, Deluxe Edition. The Penny Whistlers Press. Tin Whistle Tune Collections. Open Directory. Retrieved January 25, 2006. Wisely, Dale. Deciphering Whistle Keys. Chiff and Fipple. Retrieved March 22, 2006. Wolfe, Joe. Introduction to Flute Acoustics. UNSW Music Acoustics. Retrieved January 16, 2006. Fowley, Finton, ed. The Companion to Irish Traditional Music. New York, New York University Press. ISBN 0-8147-8802-5. External links, Tin Whistle.